And here we are with Deborah, and Deborah is this wisdom about nurturing yourself with your neurology, neuro-nurturing, a little bit of a tongue tire, but I bet you know all about it.
That's right. Thank you so very much. Such a pleasure. You know, unity is such a important thing right now. And the work I do is all around nurturing and relationships and what a difference we can make in the world when especially we start with children in the early years of their development. So my work has been all around early brain development and the understanding of what science provides for us to know what children need most and how that leads to children that are grown contributing to humanity. So
Right,
as I always say, we all benefit when all children have well-developed brains. And the reason for the term neuro-nurturing is because, you know, when I first started, I have a company called Brain Insights with the idea of giving insights into the way that children's brains develop. And what I was finding is that sometimes the term brain development can seem a little off-putting, like it might be too neuroscience-y, or people might think it's only about intelligence building and knowledge acquisition. So I thought, you know, we really need a different term to really convey that the development of a child's brain impacts all aspects of who a child is. And so I thought, what if we had a different term? And so I came up with the term neuro-nurturing. Because a main emphasis of the work that I do is on relationships and nurturing who that child is, allowing that child to be who they are, nurturing who they are, the brilliance that's within them, and have that.
Yeah, it's really obviously really important what happens in the early stages to kids, and there's more and more research there, and of course that makes such perfect sense, but just wasn't necessarily the way we've done it. So this new science and this new wisdom is coming in and helping us out here.
Exactly. And you know, when I started as an early childhood educator, as a kindergarten teacher, and during that time, it was a long time ago. And during that time, brain research information wasn't available. So so when the information did start coming out, I thought, oh, here we go. The world is going to recognize how important, like you just said, how important these early years are. And we have that opportunity to contribute to that optimal development. So, so I was so excited about this information being out, and then started realizing, even though the information was available, most people still didn't know it. It wasn't common knowledge. So I decided I wanted to do all I could to help make it become common knowledge. So when I do in-person presentations, I'm always saying, my goal is only to reach everyone. We need everyone to understand, right? We need it because, like I said earlier, it does impact all of us when children have well-developed brains. And so, so what I do is I break the science down into real simple, understandable, and practical ways of understanding and sharing these insights. So that's what I'd like to do here today, is share some of these insights about how this all happens, and in real simple, like as I said, real simple and practical ways.
Yeah, I remember when I first started hearing about this, I was dating a gal who was a kindergarten teacher and a Waldorf teacher, and she starts talking about the crossing over of the hemispheres and the cross crawls and all the different things. So yeah, give us the basics for someone who might be hearing some of this for the first time.
Okay, all right. Yeah, and it can be hearing it for the first time, or you might already know it, but ways to share it with others. That's the whole goal. Let's get everyone understanding it. So either way, if you didn't hear it before or want ideas of ways to share it. So what I initially talk about is that just helping people realize that it is experiences that impact the way in which a child's brain develops. That the brain is it's experience dependent. It is dependent on experiences to grow and physically grow and develop the brain. So when we're born with about 86 billion brain cells. And those 86 billion brain cells need to make connections with one another. And that's how the brain grows and develops. So 9 months isn't enough time to connect 86 billion brain cells. So it's kind of like those preschool years end up being like the fourth trimester in development. So those critical birth to 5 years are essential. The good news is I have to make a point here that those early years are so important because that's when it's called plasticity. That's when the brain is most adaptable. It's just taking in all these experiences and making connections in the brain. But the point I want to make is that the brain is always learning, always making changes throughout our entire lives. So new connections can be made and the brain can be rewired throughout our lives. So that's good news, right? So what I do when I do presentations, and I'll just do a quick simulation of it, I use these as representation of 2 of those 86 billion brain cells. And it's experience that impacts the way the brain makes connections. So if you pick up a child, it makes a connection in their brain because they're having that experience. If you talk to a child, if you sing to a child, if you feed a child, if you, every experience, they're learning how to crawl, they're learning how to walk, every experience they're having is making connections between those neurons. And every neuron can make more than one connection. So the number of connections the brain can make is limitless. So this is just a little quick simulation. I usually do it more in depth when I have more time. But this is a simulation. The brain actually physically grows based on those experiences that the child is having. So it just continuously makes those connections. And then after a while, the brain gets so full of those connections that it goes, wait a minute, this is too complicated. There's too much going on in here. So what it does is it starts then eliminating some of those connections that have been made. It's called pruning. So it eliminates those connections so that it can become more organized. So people start wondering when I say that, well, which connections are eliminated? And I use the analogy of, do you have that drawer in the kitchen that you put everything in and you just keep putting things in until you can't anymore, right? And then you can't find anything and it's so disorganized. That's the same kind of analogy that's going on in the brain. So when that kitchen drawer gets like that, we start pulling things out of that drawer, right? We start cleaning it out. And when we do that, what do we get rid of? The things we don't use anymore, right? The things that we don't use very often. So that's what the brain does. It eliminates those connections that have been made based on experiences that don't happen very frequently and holds on to the connections of things that have happened more frequently. So with that understanding, we need to realize, well, what kind of experiences do we want repeated most frequently? We want those positive experiences that science is showing us are most optimal and beneficial for those children's brains. So what I have done with that term neuro-nurturing, I just thought, okay, well, we need a way to organize this and share it. So I created, and I'll just pop up the model that I created. It's called the Creating Great Connections model. And I broke it down into 4 areas, 4 elements that go into optimal brain development. And that is to provide the physical needs, certainly, right? We have to provide for the physical needs that a child has, the safety and security needs, the nurturing and loving interaction, and play. So if we're providing all of those things, we're helping a child's brain develop. And so develop optimally. And so I broke those down into then 5 aspects of each of those areas. And the one that I'm going to focus on today is the nurturing aspect. And so the 5 elements to nurturing that child's brain is responsiveness, presence, empathy, respect, and recognition. So if we're providing that, a big aspect of it is responsiveness. And if a child is being responded to with a nurturing, caring, loving, give and take type of relationship, that is going to wire their brain the most positive. They need that right from the beginning. If they cry, if that baby cries, that newborn infant cries, and somebody responds, and that happens repeatedly, their brain gets wired as, I am important, I'm valued, my needs get met, this is a safe, secure place. And I'm going to go into why that is so important. So as I said, I don't go into the high levels of neuroscience, but what I do is talk about 4 basic brain areas, or 4 main brain areas. And so the brain develops from the bottom up. And so when we are born, the only part of our brain that is fully finished developing at birth in a full-term baby is the brainstem. And this is my assistant. This is Jessica, and I can demonstrate with her that at the base of her brain is where the brainstem is. Base of the brain and the top of the spinal cord. And so what happens is the neurons are making connections in the other parts of the brain, so the other higher parts of the brain begin developing after the brainstem. The brainstem is the part of the brain responsible for our basic survival, keep us alive functions. So breathing, body temperature, heart rate, all of those, like I said, keep us alive functions. So the next part of the brain to complete development is called the midbrain. And guess where that's located, right? It's not so complicated. That's the area of the brain that is responsible for our motor skills and our sleep patterns. So as her midbrain becomes more organized, her sleep patterns are going to become more regular. And we're going to be able to determine when her morning nap is and her bedtime is. Once that that part, I missed the motor skills kick in, and the connections are being made. So she's going to be able to bat at that rattle you hold in front of her, and she's going to learn to roll over and crawl and walk. Now the next area, and those 2 areas of the brain are the survival focus, and this is important because I'm going to get to the point that I'm making here. So those 2 lower areas of the brain are more focused on survival. The next area of the brain is called the limbic area. And the limbic area is a main memory area of the brain where, like, Alzheimer's would affect that area of the brain in a lot of Alzheimer's cases. It's also the emotional area of the brain. So that's where emotion takes place. And then the very last portion of the brain to complete development is way up at the top of the brain, and that's called the cortex. The cortex is considered our thinking part of the brain. So the brain develops from more of survival up to success areas as it completes development. And this is something that's very surprising sometimes to many people. Happily, it's becoming more common that people realize this. But the last portion of the brain to complete development is called the prefrontal cortex. And this is right behind our forehead. So it's a part of that cortex, but it's the very last part of the brain to complete development. And when that develops, it allows us to prioritize our thoughts, think in the abstract, to imagine, control our impulses, see things from another person's perspective, delay gratification, problem solve, and have empathy. So those are all skills we want all children and all adults to have, correct? So what we need to do is understand what's going to contribute to that optimal development. And this is the part that I'm saying is surprising to some people, that portion of the brain doesn't complete development until about the age of 25, mid-20s. So it's very helpful for people that are interacting with younger children to realize, and even teens, that that prefrontal cortex part of their brain isn't completely finished yet. Because the importance of that is that when that part of the brain does complete development, it's kind of like it takes control of those other lower portions of the brain. So if we're having big emotions, so an example I use often is like you're at the grocery store with a 2-year-old and they want that candy that's, in the checkout aisle, and you say, no, we're not getting candy. Well, she might have big emotions about that, right? So she has those big emotions that she doesn't know how to deal with yet. And so we call it out of control behavior. You know why we call it that? Because it is. It's out of her control. At 2 years old, her prefrontal cortex is very far from full development to be able to control those big emotions. When it is fully developed and developed well, then she can help control those emotions. And so the adults in her life are so important for contributing to that optimal development. Because for that 2-year-old, she can't control her emotions right now. And maybe you're dealing with that 2-year-old that's screaming in the grocery line. Maybe your limbic area, your emotional area is all lighting up and activated right now too. Like, everybody's looking at me and I don't know how to handle this. And you're feeling a lot of emotion. So calming yourself, going to your mature prefrontal cortex and saying to her, I know it's hard when you can't have what you want, isn't it? It makes you sad and it makes you mad, and you're really mad at mommy right now because I'm not giving you what you want. I know. And doing that empathizing and naming her feelings and allowing those feelings is actually contributing to her prefrontal cortex development. So you're giving her that experience. Like I said, it's experience that wires that brain. You're providing her that experience to work through those big emotions. So whatever we are, what the relationships that a child is having is contributing to that optimal development of that prefrontal cortex. And so if we can do all we can and use the information that we have that demonstrates what a difference it can make, we can contribute to developing children that can control emotions, can regulate their behavior, think in the abstract, problem solve, have empathy for others, see things from another person's perspective. And this is a lot of the emphasis of the work that I'm doing right now. I mean, I've always been doing it, but I'm really emphasizing this empathy aspect and helping people realize, because this week, the World Unity Week, if we get people empathizing and seeing things from another person's perspective, we can have a very, very positive impact on humanity. So I don't want to be just talking directly at you. If there's questions or comments, I'd love to hear what you might want to share or ask. Anyone have any?
Is this going to be recorded for people to hear again?
Yes, yes, it is recorded, and it will be shared once it's recorded. Yes.
Wonderful, because this is
Thanks
such
for
great
asking.
information. Thank you for sharing it.
Thank you.
This is actually going live on Facebook right now on the World Unity Week Facebook page. So you'll be able to access it there.
Okay, great. I have some people I would love to share the link with.
Terrific.
Yeah, thank you so much for doing this. This has been wonderful.
Awesome. And I think she still has more wisdom to share.
Of course, of course. I've got all kinds of wisdom to share because one of the things that I want to emphasize, I was emphasizing the positive experiences. Now, if a child is living in a stressful, chronically stressful environment, where there's lots of threat and fear, what happens is those children have, because of those experiences being repeated more frequently, what ends up happening is those lower functioning areas of the brain end up with more connections in it rather than the prefrontal cortex ending up with the most connections in it. So those are people that are going to be highly reactive. It's our fight or flight response. So they're going to be on guard. They're ready to fight and protect themselves. So again, we want to do all we can to minimize those type of stress experiences, those threatening experiences, or chronically stress. Like if a child is living in a situation that feels that they don't know what's going to happen next. They're always unsure about the response that they're going to get. What ends up happening is the cortisol, the stress hormone levels in that child's brain ends up staying really high. And that child is like on high alert all the time. So if you can think about, like when you've been in a stressful situation and you just get to the point where I can just relax. Well, this might not be the case for some of these children. They might be in a situation that they have to stay on that high alert a lot of the time. And so what happens is, like I said, those connections are made in their brain in those stress response areas more so that part of their brain develops larger out of proportion than in the prefrontal cortex that's going to help regulate all those behaviors develop smaller out of proportion. So the flip to what I was talking about before, we need to do all that we can to not, and I don't want to emphasize that it's not that stress is bad. I mean, we need some stress in our lives. It's motivating. Like a child learning to crawl or learning to walk, that's a stress, but it's motivating them to do and learn. And, there's lots of situations like that. But what we don't want is that constant. So what that child needs is that predictable, nurturing relationship. They need the presence of a consistent, so not only we talk about how important routines and consistency is for a child, to know that this is what we're going to do next, and we have this regular routine to our day. That's really comforting because it reduces that stress. The child knows this is what I can expect to happen next in my day. So that's important, but also predictability in the relationships. So I know that if I go to mom and I need a hug, I'm going to get a hug. I'm going to, if I ask my dad, will you play with me? They'll get a positive response. Not that they're going to get that every single time, but that's a consistent, a consistency that child can depend on. That's comforting to that child. So, and that they have at least one person in their life that is going to be that consistent, responsive, nurturing person in their life that knows that they have that brilliance within them and wants to support all that child is. So, so that responsiveness, I'm going back to my my 5 elements that I mentioned. So responsiveness, I talked about it in infancy, the responsiveness in that reciprocal relationship, the give and take of relationships is so important, so that a child, if a child is going to, if we want a child to learn how to have the expectations of a relationship and see the perspective of another person, they have to have reciprocal relationships to learn that. Those have to be present in their lives. So, so there's a term called serve and return. So I'll use Jessica as an example. Even with an infant, it's important. It begins there. So if you can picture this, so Jessica's laying here and I talk to her and I say, hi, Jessica. What does a baby do? They respond, right? So she might smile and wiggle and coo and make all kinds of reactions. And then she pauses. And then I say, yeah, you're so cute. And I respond back. We are doing turn taking, serve and return. She's learning about how relationships work. So, so that serve and return, like I said, is important right from infancy. They are watching right from day one. Have you ever heard or tried the sticking out your tongue to a newborn? They will watch you. They'll watch your mouth and your face and your tongue, and they will work to imitate you right from that point. So all those nonverbals, kids are tuning into your body language, and they tune into the emotional atmosphere. So I've been hearing a lot about during the pandemic, tensions are high, lives have changed, consistency has changed in children's lives. People are getting, more, some people are getting more agitated, and I'm hearing, there's an increase in some domestic violence in families. And so, those children are watching all of that and experiencing that and feeling those emotional levels that are happening in those situations. So we need to realize, sometimes people say, oh, they don't notice, they're too young, it won't impact them, or they won't remember. Their brain will remember. It gets wired in their brain, all of those experiences. So I mentioned presence, being present for that child is so important. They need and love attention, and we all do, right? I mean, who likes to be ignored? So we all need that. And then I mentioned empathy already as the example with the child in the grocery store. If we empathize, they're going to learn that skill of empathy. Respecting that child for who they are. I said that right at the beginning, that we need to respect and support that child to develop all that they are, who they are, and just allow that and relish in it and support it. And I'm a big proponent of doing all we can to avoid labeling children. And I don't just mean labels with abilities and that kind of thing, or special educational needs. I'm talking about labeling in any way. Because the example that I use is because the labeling, what the labeling does is it gives a judgment. And so the example I use is if a child brings us a picture that they drew, what's our natural response? Oh, good job. That's beautiful, right? And that's very positive. But what that is our judgment of it. We're deciding if it was a good job, or we're deciding if it's a beautiful picture. So instead, what I advocate for is that we do all we can to help the child learn to self-evaluate and think positively about themselves. So what I suggest instead is we can say, wow, you look like you're really proud of your picture. And then the child can say, yeah, I didn't know I could draw a tree like that before. And they can self-evaluate and be proud of themselves. Or you can even ask them, are you proud of your picture? You look like you're proud of your picture. Or that child might say, you know, I think I can do better. And they can go and try again. But if we just say good job, we're just setting the bar right there and not allowing that child to try to do even more. So we really want that child to learn to self-evaluate rather than depending on the opinion and the judgments of others. So that can help them in their self-talk. You know, what we want them to do is talk positively about themselves. So that also, all our thoughts, not only, I talked about experiences impacting our brain, our thoughts also impact our brain and wire and make those connections. So what that all does is it creates pathways in the brain. And I use the analogy when I do my PowerPoint presentations. I have a picture of a path on the ground. And so I talked about the repetition, the way that repetition makes the impact on the way the brain holds on to connections. So if you picture a path on the ground, if you go over it the first time, not much happens, right? But if you go over it and over it and over it again, a deep path is worn. It's the same thing in the brain. So if we're having repeated experiences or repeated thoughts, it creates strong pathways in the brain. And as I said way at the beginning also, is the good news is we can always make those changes. The difficult thing is it's harder to make those changes later than it is to make them when the brain has the most plasticity in those early years of life. So what happens is when those experiences are happening repeatedly and the brain has determined it's going to hold on to that connection, what it does is it creates something called myelin. I'm using this plastic tubing to represent the myelin. And that myelin is a fatty, waxy substance that coats the connections that have been made from repetition, from repeated experiences. And it holds those connections in place stronger. So that's why it's harder, makes it harder for us to make changes later, as in our later ages, than it is to make those changes as positively as, or make those connections as positively as possible in the first place. So that's why I do the work that I do, is let's do as much as we can to develop those brains as healthy as possible in the first place, so we don't have to make as many changes later. But again, the good news is we're always learning throughout our lives, and we can make those changes and those adjustments. I mean, even if those lower functioning areas of the brain were developed very strongly and we're in the fight or flight mode a lot of our time, it can be changed. That's the good news. So we can remake those connections at any time. So those pathways can be worn, but we can go in new directions and create new pathways all throughout our lives. So any other questions that anyone might have? No more questions? Another aspect of what I talk about is how the brain focuses attention. So the brain can only focus attention on one thing at a time. And so sometimes that's surprising to people. The thing is, we can do more than one thing at a time, but we can only pay attention to one thing at a time. So that's why texting and driving doesn't work, because if we pay attention to the text, we're not paying attention to our driving. And another example with driving is, when you first started learning to drive, your attention was so focused on what your foot was doing, how much pressure you were putting on that gas pedal, and how much you were moving the steering wheel, and what way I have to look, and you're just so focused on every aspect of learning how to drive. But now, I'm willing to bet you've had experiences that you drive on a regular route that you go to frequently, and you get to your destination, you go, oh, I wasn't paying attention to my drive the whole way. You were thinking and listening to the music or whatever you were doing, probably not real focused on your driving. So that's an example of how the brain can only focus attention on one thing. If it's focusing your attention on what you're thinking about instead of your driving, it's the one thing. So one person in a presentation said to me, no, I can watch TV and I can knit at the same time. And I said, yeah, exactly. You can watch the television and you can knit without paying attention to your knitting, or you can stop and you have to change colors or change a stitch and you're knitting and you focus on that, and now your brain is not focused on what is happening on the television. So the reason I share this is because we can use this to our advantage when we realize this. So we can focus our attention on the positives for our children so that we are reinforcing who they are and helping them redirect their attention to the positives, because the brain will do that. It's negative biased for survival focus, but if we redirect it, it will go in that other direction. So, a child can be thinking, oh, I'm not smart, for example. If it gets redirected, and well, maybe there's some times that, you can think of that you might have been smart. The brain will go in that direction and look for evidence to support that belief. Whatever we believe, the brain is going to focus on whatever supports that belief. So that's a really important aspect to helping that child be all that they can be. Any other comments or questions? Well, this has been a complete pleasure. I love sharing this information. We can make a difference for humanity, right? I mean, if we realize both that we can have an impact on these children in these early years, and we can make our changes in brains throughout our lives, we can have these positive impacts. And if we emphasize people seeing other people from their perspective and showing empathy, we can have an impact on unity within this world. And so what I always ask is, if you gain some insights and some understanding from what I have shared, then please share it with anyone and everyone you know, and we'll just keep spreading this understanding, because as I said again at the beginning, we need everyone to understand this. We not only need parents and educators to understand this, but we need policymakers and employers and the general public and voters and everyone, so we can get support for all those that are positively influencing children. So spread the word, share the insights, and let's make a difference in this world for all of humanity.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Deborah. Very nice, and obviously really important information. That there's that spreading, right? Just plant a seed with somebody, one little exercise, one little thought, one little Facebook post that you can throw out, and we can help help each other, help ourselves.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah, and you
All right.
just brought to mind, I listened to Scarlett Lewis's talk this morning, and it hurt when Sandy Hook happened, and maybe some of you don't know, Scarlett Lewis has created a movement called Choose Love, and she teaches how children can choose love as a result of her son, Jesse, being murdered in the Sandy Hook shooting. And so I've been connected with her for a while, but I got to, hear her session on World Unity Week this morning. And the reason I'm bringing that up is to go with your comment that we can just keep spreading this. And the day that Sandy Hook shooting happened, I felt I had to do something. And so I created a new presentation called Creating Great Connections. And it's designed to go into communities so that communities can spread those one by one insights throughout their community. And if we get multiple communities doing this, we can have the impact that we all deserve and want.